So I'm going to take a hint from Reese and do a little advertisement. So I'm from Regent University School of Law in Virginia Beach, Virginia, the fastest growing Christian law school in the country, because students there are called to, by God, to integrate their faith in every area of their practice. And we have a little saying called, law is more than a profession, it's a calling. And all those students know they're called. And then I'm going to try to follow, I can't follow Milton, but I'm going to try to follow Trevor? Ryan. I'm going to try to follow Ryan and tell you that my poor students in 5 hours are going to be talking about the sunset provisions of the Tax Cut and Jobs Acts of 2025, depending on the election on Tuesday. So I'm sure they'd much rather change places with you guys. I'm sure they would. But anyway, I also wanted to just thank the professors Gillespie and White and Stuart Horner. I wanted to thank you guys because generally in a symposium in the United States, we don't get such care, except by maybe the symposium editor of the law review. So thank you very much. Very, very wonderful to be here. This is a significant event. So I'm a Christian female law professor in the United States who generally has a target audience of radical feminists. So I am so happy to be here among like-minded colleagues and Lewis aficionados. This doesn't happen in my world. In fact, I just published an article, a law review article called The Abolition of Woman. And so few people in my world understood who or what I was channeling. But they still published it. If you're interested, it's in the Cardozo Journal of Social Justice and Equal Rights, so I placed it in a good place. Anyway, teaching family law, though, I'm always intrigued by the role that children play in law and culture. Am I not speaking enough into the mic? Sure. And obviously, children hold great significance for Lewis in the corpus of his writings, but particularly in the Narniad, as Michael Ward calls it. That could be because they're exceptionally positioned towards story, or maybe because they're uniquely suited to point us to the end of our story, because they're always asking us questions. Today, I consider 3 areas of how Lewis made it absolutely necessary to have children tell us our story. First, as participants in justice. Second, as storytellers. And finally, as leaders in the story. I'll only have 1 slide, and you'll be constantly reminded of my 3 points. So I'll just move through them. So why these 3 areas? Well, first, what you might not know is that a key concept in emerging global law and sociology regarding children is that children should be participants in justice, a notion which really does unconsciously mirror what may have been Lewis's view that children are really central actors in any story in making it right. The second point, my central element in seeing the end of our story, is how Lewis, through the Narniad, encourages us to see or view the story through the eyes of children as storytellers. He draws this out by making the children the storytellers, even when those children may not be believed because they're children. And for the lawyers in this room, we know that children are not believed in a courtroom simply because they're children. So it's very unique that Lewis chose this. And then thirdly, Lewis made children the leaders in the story. I think it was by his great respect and value for children, he created characters who were children in England, but leaders in Narnia. And there in Narnia, they embody this weightiness throughout the entirety of the story. They become the leaders. Now, one quick word about Lewis. He himself never used the word kid. He hated that word. He used it 1 time, and I'll show you where, in a pejorative way, why he used it that way. But he said, I hated the word. It is the rottenest word. And then he also said things about encouraging us to treat children with respect. So what I'm going to do is integrate Lewis's letters to children, with the characters in Narnia, and see where we go with this. I hope to reveal why and how Lewis chose children as the models for the end of our stories. So allow me to open with his letter to Philip on November 21, 1963. Dear Philip, to begin with, may I congratulate you on writing such a remarkably good letter. I certainly could not have written it at your age. And to go on with, thank you for telling me that you like my books. That is a thing an author is always pleased to hear. You know, it's a funny thing that all the children who have written to me see at once who Aslan is. The grown-ups never do. With all best wishes to you and to them, yours sincerely, C.S. Lewis. Now, if you were paying attention to that date, this was the very last letter that C.S. Lewis wrote, because on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, he died peacefully in his home. He would have been 65 the next week. Children always get it, right? He understood. And then, we could talk for a few minutes about why Lewis loved children. I've done other things on, his mother, his father, things like that. But let me point to you another letter to children on page, September 14th, 1953. It says, Dear Philidia, I have been away in Donegal, which is glorious. And I say, I think you are right about some points, but I feel sure that I'm right to make the children grow up in Narnia. Of course, they'll grow up in this world too, as you'll see. I don't think age matters so much as people think. In fact, parts of me are still 12. And I think other parts of me were already 50 when I was 12. Yours sincerely, C.S. Lewis. The Ross drawing looks like Lewis feels 12. I love it. Really special. A quick word on Donegal, though. All of you understand Donegal, but I got to talk about how Michael Ward talks about Donegal. He denotes the Donegality. He created a new word, Donegality, and it took me reading the book second time to really get it. But it's this spiritual essence, this peculiar, deliberate atmosphere that Lewis was weaving, made pervasive through the whole Narnia story. He wanted to conjure up a feeling in us as his readers. And I suggest to you that Donegality is only really experienced if you're like a child at the beach. Think about it. We took my grandson to the beach this summer, and he laughed and cheered and ran away from the waves and ran to them. He wanted to be engulfed by the waves. So that Donegality is something that the reader needs to experience. But also, Psalm 127 offers a scriptural basis for children and their leadership among us right now, referring to them as a blessing. If you have many that fill your quiver, referring even to a battle, and then later in that verse, they shall not be put to shame when they contend with their enemies at the gate. Children are going to be in a battle. So, children get it. They're critical to our story. In fact, researcher and apologist George Barna, this is the other book that I really want to recommend to anybody, Raising Spiritual Champions. He says, children represent our eternal legacy. They are our spiritual heirs. Indeed, there is no people group to focus on that is more significant. And I suggest to you that is absolutely true. So how are children the focus? Let's first talk about children as participants in justice. So in the United States, the best interest of the child is really the standard anytime there's something involving a child in court or in the law. But the global framework is different, and you guys probably already know this. The global framework is one of children's rights, and it's embodied in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And a key part of that says that children need to be participating in their own justice, in their own destiny. And they need to do so apart from their parents and apart from the state. Now, my problem with this, and I've written about this quite a bit, is that the CRC pits the rights of these three against each other. Children versus parents, parents versus children, children versus state. Well, you know who always loses in those? Especially against the state, the child is always going to lose because the state is so powerful. So I feel like the children's rights framework breaks down right there. But I've still tried to focus my work in this on child participation in their own justice through what we use in the United States called teen courts. These teen courts are where children are heard and judged by their peers who participate in their own justice. The research shows over and over that when children are involved and allowed to participate in their own justice, they see their own problems better. They see their own peril, and they make adjustments, and it works. Today, children are targets of all kinds of things. NYU sociologist Jonathan Haidt, in his recent book, The Anxious Generation, discusses what he calls the rapid rewiring of the adolescent brain by smartphones, by parental safetyism, by all kinds of puberty blocking things. He says all of these are experience blockers. that children should be experiencing in some way to make that important transition to adulthood. Well, children need to be participants, and in Narnia, children were the ones who not only participated, but they effectuated justice. Think about it. Every single entry of children into Narnia was to set things right, was it not? Every time they entered. To participate in the Narnia story, to bring about justice. Right away, Lewis places children in particular importance and in particular peril in the story. Why did he give them such key roles? Well, let's look at that. Some answers to that question might include Lewis's story himself. I think he put himself in the story of my husband's favorite Narnia Chronicle, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And he opens it with, does anybody know the line? There once was a boy named Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. Now, can't you hear echoes of there once was a boy named Clive Staples Lewis, and he almost deserved it? I think he thought of himself as Lewis. In fact, in Surprised by Joy, Lewis calls himself, a word that we don't use in the United States, a prig. He says another child pushed him into pure priggery. He said, I had become a prig, a highbrow. Maybe he sees that he himself needed to be undragoned. Well, as for the central characters in Narnia, Lewis set up the Narniad where the children were absolutely required to participate from the minute it started. The Pevensies had to stay in Narnia to get Tumnus out of jail, to rescue their brother. They had to be brave. They had to rescue Narnia. They couldn't simply go back to England, although I believe Susan suggested that at first, and we'll mention Susan toward the end. We see the children not just participating in justice in the story, but executing the justice. Think about Peter. He kills Malgrin Wolfbane. He executes justice there. He tries to repeat that with the White Witch, and later again fighting the usurper King Miraz and Prince Caspian. The children are participants in justice itself. So that's my first point. They need to be participants, and especially in justice. My second point is that children are storytellers. And if you have kids or grandkids, you can, or if you are a kid, you understand what I mean. Tell us a story, Grandpa. I can hear Bree, the talking horse and his boy, my favorite Narniad, say to Shasta and Hwin during Erebus's recounting of all her perils, Bree says, hush, be quiet. You're spoiling the story. She'll tell us all in the right place in the proper Calorman style. And later in the Chronicle, when Shasta asks Aslan, why did he wound Erebus? Aslan responds, child, I'm telling you your story, not hers. I tell no one any story but his own. Telling the story is significant. I can hear Prince Tyrion say to Eustace, as he interrupts Jill explaining how they arrived in Narnia in the last battle, you hinder the lady's tale. Be quiet, Eustace. The leading adult, the king of Narnia, wants to listen to the child, and he lets the child rescue him. Upon their return to England, the children tell the story to the professor. We see children may not be believed, though, even by other children, because they are children. Think of Lucy. She's the first storyteller in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? She's the best storyteller. But she is not believed because Edmund smugly adds, and here we go, that's the worst of young kids. The only time Lewis uses the word kid. But Lewis wants us to trust children, to hear the stories. Some of my current research is going into a case book called Children in the Law, and we hope to make it particularly pragmatic with examples of how to conduct a child interview, particularly when the child has been through trauma situations, to draw out the truth of what has happened to this child through the child's testimony. The law is really important because it does not, this is really important, we think, in our book, because the law often does not value a child's testimony, as I mentioned earlier. This tends to be true even in the face of clear deception by an adult or another child. Remember in Prince Caspian, when Lucy saw Aslan and she was telling the others, I see Aslan, but they didn't believe her? She's the truth teller, and they didn't believe her. She's also the storyteller. When she follows Aslan, they must follow Aslan too. A lesson for us in our life now. It's quite possible that Lewis is portraying children as storytellers precisely because they're the best truth tellers. And because they are the best truth tellers, they are the most reliable witnesses to the end of our story. the gospel finale. As our friend Professor Terry Linval says, they can smuggle in the gospel. Children are storytellers. And that leads me to my third point, children as leaders in this story. Isaiah's prophecy, and a child shall lead them. This is the key, the third key. Let me give you a quick flash. Diggory Kirke begins a story, the new Narnia, new heaven. He and Polly, begin that. They become leaders. They're just little kids being manipulated